Welcome to Silent Screams, where the shadows come alive, and the stories are as chilling as the darkest corners of your mind. Tonight, we take you on a journey down one of the most infamous highways in America, Route 66, where a forgotten motel hides secrets far more terrifying than you could imagine. This isn't just any ordinary tale. It's born from whispers on Reddit, first-hand accounts of terror that unfold in the desolate heart of Arizona's desert. As we delve deeper, remember, every flicker of light, every creak in the floorboards, and every distant whisper has a story of its own. Let's begin. Route 66, once called the Main Street of America, was more than just a road. It was a lifeline connecting towns and dreams. But somewhere along its endless stretch of asphalt, a motel fell into ruin. It wasn't always a place of despair. In the 1950s, it was bustling with families on road trips, honeymooners seeking adventure, and truckers looking for a night's rest. Now, the paint peels like dead skin, the neon sign flickers sporadically, and the silence is broken only by the occasional howl of the desert wind. The first Reddit story about the motel was from a user named Night Wanderer 89. He claimed to have stumbled upon the place during a road trip with friends. They were low on gas, and the next town was miles away. The motel seemed like a godsend at first, but as they pulled into the gravel driveway, unease crept in. The air felt heavier, as if the very atmosphere was trying to warn them. The front office was eerily empty, no clerk in sight, only a faint smell of mildew and something metallic, like blood. When they finally found a key hanging behind the counter, they assumed it was self-check-in. The room was dingy but functional. They laughed off the unease, attributing it to exhaustion. But that night, things began to spiral. It started with faint whispers, almost imperceptible, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. The friends thought it was the wind, but the whispers turned into clear, disembodied voices. Someone, or something, was calling their names. Another Reddit user, Echo Lens, shared a similar experience. She stayed at the motel alone, documenting her road trip for her travel blog. Her posts described a growing discomfort as soon as she checked in. She wrote about seeing a figure in the hallway mirror, a man in an old-fashioned bellhop uniform who vanished the moment she turned around. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light. But the figure reappeared throughout her stay, always watching, always just out of reach. One night, she decided to confront it. Armed with her camera, she stepped into the hallway, the faint hum of the broken neon sign her only light. The figure was there, standing at the end of the corridor, its face obscured by shadow. She raised her camera, and as the flash went off, the figure lunged toward her. She blacked out and woke up the next morning in her car, parked miles away from the motel. Her camera was gone, but a single Polaroid was left on the passenger seat. It showed her, standing in the hallway, but the figure was now directly behind her, its face a grotesque mask of decay. Reddit threads lit up with stories about the motel. People described hearing footsteps in empty hallways, doors slamming shut without explanation, and even seeing figures standing at the edge of the desert, watching the motel from afar. Some speculated that the motel was built on cursed land. Others believed it was a trap, a place that lured travelers to their doom. One particularly chilling story came from a Redditor named Desert Phantom. He worked as a truck driver and often traveled Route 66. He'd heard rumors about the motel but dismissed them as campfire tales. One night, his truck broke down nearby, and he decided to see the place for himself. He described the overwhelming sense of dread as he approached. The building seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, the windows dark and empty, like soulless eyes. As he walked through the abandoned lobby, he noticed the faint sound of a piano playing. Following the sound, he entered a lounge area, where an old, dust-covered piano stood in the corner. No one was there, but the keys moved as if played by invisible hands. Then, a single note echoed loudly, shattering the oppressive silence. He turned to leave, but the door to the lobby slammed shut, locking him inside. He spent the night trapped, hearing whispers, laughter, and the sound of footsteps pacing just outside the room he barricaded himself in. When dawn finally broke, the door was open, and he fled without looking back. Later, he discovered scratch marks on the inside of the door, as if something had been trying to claw its way in. The threads also mentioned a strange phenomenon outside the motel, a glowing light that appeared in the desert at night. It hovered in the distance, pulsating, almost beckoning travelers toward it. Those who followed the light reported losing hours of time, only to find themselves back at the motel, unable to remember how they got there. The stories became darker, more twisted, with each new account. A Redditor named Lost Traveler 93 claimed that during his stay, he awoke to find his reflection missing from the bathroom mirror. Instead, the mirror showed the room as it would have looked decades ago: freshly painted walls, a vase of flowers on the nightstand, and a man sitting on the edge of the bed, staring directly at him. The horror of the motel lies not just in its ghostly inhabitants, but in the sense of entrapment it creates. No matter how far you run, it feels as if the motel is always waiting, always watching, its doors forever open to those who dare to enter. The stories you've heard tonight are just the beginning, and the deeper we go, the darker it gets. The motel's ominous grip on its visitors didn't end with the eerie stories shared on Reddit. Many who claimed to have escaped spoke of recurring nightmares, dreams where they were back in the motel, unable to leave, no matter how far they ran. They'd wake drenched in sweat, their hearts racing, and their minds filled with the distinct scent of mildew and dust that lingered in the air during their stay. But these nightmares were just the beginning. Some claimed that even in their waking hours, they could feel the motel's pull, like a dark thread wrapping tighter around their souls. There was a particularly chilling account from a user known only as Wired Soul. He worked as a freelance videographer and had decided to document the motel for his YouTube channel. With cameras, microphones, and a drone, he planned to capture every detail of the abandoned site, hoping to debunk the legends. His first mistake was going alone. His second was staying past nightfall. According to his post, the first few hours were uneventful. He recorded shots of the crumbling facade, the rusted motel sign with its letters partially missing, and the eerily silent surroundings. But as dusk settled, his equipment began to fail. The drone lost its signal mid-flight and crashed into the desert. His camera battery, fully charged just moments before, drained inexplicably. Frustrated but undeterred, he decided to explore the interior with just a flashlight and his phone. The moment he stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. His footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the empty halls, as if the building itself was amplifying the sound. He spoke to the camera, narrating his experience, but when he played back the audio later, there was a faint voice whispering over his words. "Leave now," it repeated, growing louder each time he rewound the footage. As he ventured deeper, he found a staircase leading to the second floor. Every step creaked under his weight, the sound almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. When he reached the top, he noticed that the hallway was impossibly long, far longer than it should have been based on the building's exterior. Doors lined the corridor, each marked with peeling gold numbers, yet none of them were ajar. He tried opening a few, but they wouldn't budge, as if something was holding them shut from the other side. And then he saw it. At the far end of the hallway, barely illuminated by his flickering flashlight, stood a figure. It wasn't moving, but it wasn't still either. It seemed to vibrate subtly, like a mirage in the desert heat. The figure was tall, its features obscured by shadows, but its eyes, or what he assumed were eyes, glowed faintly, a sickly yellow that pierced the darkness. Frozen with fear, he pointed his camera toward the figure, only to find the screen completely black. When he lowered the device, the figure was gone. Panicked, he decided to leave, but the motel had other plans. As he descended the stairs, the walls seemed to close in around him. The once familiar lobby was now unrecognizable, its layout distorted, with doors and hallways leading to places he hadn't seen before. He tried retracing his steps, but no matter which direction he turned, he ended up back at the front desk, its bell ringing on its own. The climax of his ordeal came when he finally found what he thought was the exit. The glass doors were wide open, revealing the night sky and the silhouette of his car parked outside. But as he ran toward them, the temperature dropped suddenly, his breath visible in the air. Just as he was about to cross the threshold, an unseen force yanked him backward, slamming him to the ground. He described the sensation as being gripped by icy hands, each finger pressing into his skin with inhuman strength. When he awoke, he was lying in the desert, his equipment scattered around him. His phone, which he had been using to film, was cracked but still operational. Upon reviewing the footage, he found a single, inexplicable clip. It showed him standing in the lobby, his back to the camera. Behind him, dozens of shadowy figures emerged from the walls and floor, their glowing eyes fixed on him. The clip ended abruptly as the shadows engulfed him. After sharing his story, Wired Soul disappeared from Reddit. Some users speculated that he returned to the motel, unable to resist its pull. Others believed the motel had claimed him, as it had so many before. His account, though terrifying, wasn't unique. Another story surfaced from Desert Nomad, a drifter who claimed to have lived near the motel for years. He spoke of strange lights that appeared above the building at night, hovering silently before vanishing into the sky. He described hearing screams echoing across the desert, followed by a deafening silence that seemed to absorb all sound. He warned anyone reading his post to stay away, but his final words were cryptic. It's not just the dead who haunt that place. It's something older, something hungry. The motel's sinister reputation grew as more stories emerged. One couple, Road Trip Terrors, recounted their harrowing experience after pulling over for what they thought was a quick rest. They never even entered the motel, they only parked in its lot. Yet, within minutes, they both began hearing faint laughter, like children playing hide-and-seek. The sound came from all around them, though the surrounding desert was empty. When they tried to leave, their car wouldn't start. The laughter grew louder, more manic, until it was accompanied by a banging on the car windows. In their panic, they locked the doors and closed their eyes, praying for it to stop. When they finally opened their eyes, they were parked on the side of the highway, miles away from the motel, with no memory of how they got there. The stories all shared a common thread: the feeling of being watched, the oppressive atmosphere, and the unshakable sense that the motel was alive. Some speculated that it was a thin spot between worlds, where the veil between the living and the dead was weakest. Others believed it was cursed by the land's original inhabitants, their anger manifesting in the motel's walls. But one detail stood out among all the accounts: Room 6. Several stories mentioned it, though none could explain why. Those who stayed in Room 6 reported the most terrifying encounters: objects moving on their own, mirrors reflecting things that weren't there, and a persistent knocking sound that seemed to come from inside the walls. One traveler, Haunted Nomad, claimed that when he checked the room's closet, he found it filled with old photographs of past guests, all of them scratched out except for their eyes. As the tales grew darker, one thing became clear: the motel wasn't just a place. It was a predator, feeding on fear, drawing people in with its desolate charm and trapping them in a web of terror. The more people shared their stories, the more the motel seemed to thrive, as if every whisper of its name gave it strength. And yet, despite all the warnings, despite all the terror, there were still those who felt the irresistible urge to visit. What was it about this place that called to them? Was it the allure of the unknown? Or something far more sinister at work? The answers lay within the motel's crumbling walls, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to seek them.